She laughed when I called her beautiful, said I was just a kid, too young to know what love meant. But that night, when our eyes met under the porch light, she realized some things age can't explain. It was an ordinary Friday evening when I arrived at her apartment building. The city bathed in golden light from the setting sun. My job was simple: deliver a small set of furniture, a nightstand, a lamp, and a folding chair. Yet, as I stepped out of the elevator onto the 4th floor, I felt a subtle tension in the air, something I couldn't name. She opened the door before I even knocked. Her name was Vanessa, a 40-year-old American woman with long black hair that shimmered in the warm evening light. Her skin was lightly tanned, with soft laugh lines and subtle freckles that gave her an approachable, graceful beauty. She wore a casual yet elegant blouse tucked into slim slacks, exuding confidence and quiet composure. When she looked at me, her dark brown eyes were calm but inquisitive, a slight tilt to her head as if measuring whether I belonged in her space. "You're early," she said with a small smile, her voice soft but steady. "Traffic was surprisingly kind today," I said, trying to keep my tone light, though my chest tightened just a little. There was something about the way she moved, the ease in her gestures, that made ordinary words feel heavier. I started bringing in the nightstand, careful not to scratch the hardwood floor. Her gaze followed my movements, lingering slightly longer than necessary. "Do you do this often?" she asked, stepping aside to let me pass. "Most days," I replied, adjusting the small lamp. "It's routine, but it keeps things interesting." She chuckled softly, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Interesting, huh? I guess that's one way to look at it." There was a subtle warmth in her tone, an openness that made me want to talk more than I normally would. As I assembled the lamp on the nightstand, she crouched beside me, pointing out a small adjustment. Her hand brushed mine ever so slightly. Accidental, no doubt, but I felt the pulse of a quiet electricity. I looked up, meeting her eyes, and for a moment time slowed. There was no flirtation, no overt signal, just an unspoken connection, a recognition of presence. "Perfect," she said finally, stepping back to admire the work. "It fits just right." I nodded, reaching for my clipboard. She took the pen to sign the delivery receipt, our fingers brushing lightly again. That subtle touch lingered in my memory, more than it should have. Before I left, she stood in the doorway with a soft smile, the last rays of sunlight framing her face. "You did a good job," she said, voice quiet but sincere. "Thank you," I replied, feeling a strange mixture of pride and hesitation. As I walked to the elevator, I realized something. This wasn't just another delivery. Something about Vanessa's presence, the calm in her eyes, and the warmth of her smile had already left a mark on me. I didn't know it yet, but this evening was the start of a connection neither of us could ignore. Subtle, unspoken, and full of quiet potential. And even as I stepped into the elevator, I found myself glancing back, hoping she would look back too. It had been 3 days since the delivery, but I couldn't stop thinking about Vanessa. Her presence lingered in my mind. The calm in her gaze, the faint warmth of her smile, and the quiet way she carried herself. I kept telling myself it was just a delivery, just a job. Yet every time I replayed that brief encounter, it felt more significant than it should. The next call from the shop brought my chance. Vanessa had requested a minor adjustment to the nightstand. Nothing urgent, nothing complicated, just a small screw that had come loose. I volunteered immediately, though I tried to mask my eagerness. My coworker gave me a knowing grin, muttering, "Looks like someone's looking forward to this more than they admit." I laughed it off, pretending it didn't bother me, but my palms were a little sweaty as I loaded the toolbox into my truck. When I arrived, the front door opened almost instantly. Vanessa stood there, her posture relaxed but attentive, the soft glow of late afternoon sunlight falling across her face. She wore a flowing light green blouse with subtle embroidery along the cuffs and beige slacks that complemented her graceful figure. Her long black hair was tied loosely at the back, a few strands catching in the breeze. She smiled. Not a polite, formal smile, but one that felt genuine, personal, as if she'd been waiting for me. Back so soon? She asked lightly, stepping aside to let me in. Seems your furniture couldn't wait, I replied, setting the toolbox on the floor. She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to fill the room without effort. It was the kind of laugh that made ordinary moments feel heavier with meaning, that made even silence feel comfortable. As I knelt by the nightstand, tightening the screw, she perched on the edge of the nearby sofa, her posture casual yet elegant. She observed me quietly, a soft smile tugging at her lips. At one point, her hand brushed mine as she leaned forward to point out a spot I'd missed. It was accidental, fleeting, yet the warmth lingered. My heart thudded in a way I didn't expect. We fell into conversation, the kind that begins without pretense. She spoke about her work, her hobbies, and the small joys of her day-to-day life. I listened, genuinely engaged, noticing how her dark brown eyes sparkled when she mentioned her favorite cafe nearby, how the sunlight highlighted the subtle freckles across her cheeks, and how her laugh lines deepened when she smiled. Most people wouldn't notice such small details, she said, almost to herself, a faint wistfulness in her tone. They matter, I replied, meeting her gaze. They tell the story of who we are. Her smile softened further, and for a brief moment, I felt a quiet connection, a shared understanding between two people who hadn't known each other long but were already beginning to see beneath the surface. When the screw was finally tightened and the adjustment complete, she stood near the doorway, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. You really do take your work seriously, she said quietly. It's easy when the person appreciates it, I replied, glancing at her. Her eyes met mine, calm, knowing, and warm. That single moment, fleeting yet loaded with subtle emotion, left me with the unmistakable sense that this was no ordinary encounter. It was the beginning of something neither of us could yet name, something that would quietly grow between us in ways we couldn't predict. It was early Saturday morning when the phone at the shop rang. My coworker glanced at me, raising an eyebrow with a smirk I couldn't quite ignore. Looks like someone wants another small adjustment, he said. I rolled my eyes, pretending to be annoyed, but my heart had already started racing. It was Vanessa again. Something about her requests, minor as they were, had begun to feel like an invitation, or at least a chance to see her again. I told myself it was just part of the job, a professional courtesy, but deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. When I arrived at her apartment, she was already standing by the door, smiling warmly as if no time had passed at all. Her long black hair glimmered in the morning sun, cascading gently over her shoulders. She wore a soft pastel blouse and white linen pants, her posture relaxed yet undeniably graceful. Her lightly tanned skin and subtle freckles caught the light, highlighting the soft laugh lines near her eyes. Even in casual clothes, she exuded a kind of understated elegance that made her impossible to ignore. Good morning, she said, voice soft, almost teasing. I hope I'm not being a bother. Not at all, I replied, carrying my toolbox into the hallway. Happy to help. Inside, the apartment felt warm and alive. Sunlight spilled through the large windows, falling on the furniture and filling the space with a golden glow. Vanessa knelt beside me as I adjusted the wobbly coffee table, pointing out spots that needed tightening. Our shoulders brushed accidentally, but the brief contact lingered, sending a quiet electricity through me. I noticed her dark brown eyes flicker toward mine, a subtle smile forming at the corner of her lips, and I felt my own smile return without conscious thought. We fell into easy conversation, laughter spilling into the room as she joked about her forgetfulness and the chaos of her busy schedule. I found myself listening closely, drawn not only to her words but to the calm, steady way she carried herself. Her movements were deliberate, yet unforced, as if she inhabited the space with quiet confidence. She handed me a cup of coffee mid-task, our fingers brushing lightly. The touch was brief, but the warmth of it stayed with me, filling the room with a tension that neither of us tried to acknowledge. I took a sip, pretending it was ordinary, but the subtle intimacy of the moment lingered far longer than the coffee itself. When the adjustment was finally complete, Vanessa stepped back to admire the table. Perfect, she said softly, her gaze warm and appreciative. She laughed lightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You make even small favors feel like a big deal." I shrugged, trying to appear casual, but I could feel the truth in her words. Every small task with her seemed charged with significance, each smile, glance, and touch quietly deepening the connection between us. As I packed up my tools, she walked me to the door. Her eyes met mine, calm yet knowing, and for a moment, the world outside seemed distant and unimportant. I left her apartment that morning with a strange mix of satisfaction and longing, realizing that these small favors had become more than work. They were a bridge to something neither of us fully understood yet. And I found myself hoping quietly that there would always be a next favor, a next conversation, another chance to be in her presence. After that morning, the rhythm of life returned, but something had shifted. Work became routine again. Deliveries, pickups, the familiar hum of the truck engine. But my thoughts kept wandering back to Vanessa. The apartment, the sunlight spilling over her furniture, the warmth in her voice, and the subtle touch of her hand all lingered in my memory like a quiet echo I couldn't shake. For days, I resisted calling or texting her. I told myself it was best to maintain distance, to keep the boundary of professional politeness intact. Yet each morning, while loading the truck or checking delivery addresses, I found myself glancing at her street in the map, wondering if she was home, if she was thinking of me at all. The quiet tension of what if grew heavier with each passing day. One afternoon, while I was cleaning and organizing the warehouse, my coworker nudged me with a knowing look. "You've been spending a lot of time on that one client," he said casually, but his tone carried a hint of teasing judgment. "People talk, you know. Just be careful." I forced a laugh, shrugging it off. "It's nothing like that," I said, though his words lingered. People talk. The idea unsettled me. What if someone misunderstood our interactions? What if my feelings, subtle and careful as they were misread? The thought made my chest tighten in ways I hadn't anticipated. Days slipped into a quiet routine. I tried to fill the spaces with friends, errands, and work, yet even the familiar comfort of my truck didn't dull the ache of absence. I began noticing the smallest things. The angle of sunlight on the sidewalk, the sound of wind chimes from a nearby house, the smell of freshly mown grass. Each little detail carried a phantom trace of her presence. Eventually, I couldn't resist. One late afternoon, after finishing a long set of deliveries, I found myself driving past her street. The house looked unchanged, tidy, welcoming, sunlit. Yet from the curb, there was a distance I couldn't bridge. The curtains were drawn, the porch quiet. I didn't knock. I just sat in the truck for a few moments, allowing myself the small comfort of seeing the place she inhabited. That evening, rain began to fall, steady, soft, and cleansing. I stood at my apartment window, watching droplets hit the pavement. I thought about that first touch, her quiet guidance as I adjusted her furniture, the way her smile had felt both effortless and intimate. I missed it, not in a desperate, clinging way, but in a subtle, quiet longing for the simplicity of connection she had brought into my life. It was in the silence, with only the rain as a companion, that I realized I didn't want to rush anything. Our connection was slow, delicate, and necessary. Distance, I understood now, was not punishment. It was space. Space to reflect, to notice, and to understand what mattered. By the time the rain stopped, I had made a silent promise. If she ever needed me again, I would show up, not with expectation, not with demands, but quietly, respectfully, the way she deserved. And in that understanding, a calm settled within me, a quiet readiness for whatever came next. It had been nearly a month since I last saw Vanessa, and in that time, I tried convincing myself that our brief encounters were just coincidences, small flashes in a routine life. But the day she appeared at my doorstep again, I knew this was no coincidence. I had been organizing tools in the back of my truck when I heard the soft click of the front door. Glancing up, my heart skipped a beat. There she was. Vanessa stood in the doorway, her long black hair slightly damp from a sudden drizzle outside. She wore a light trench coat over a pale green dress the hem brushing just above her knees, and a soft scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. Her lightly tanned skin glowed despite the rain, her subtle freckles catching the muted light, and the faint lines at the corners of her eyes deepened as she gave me a small, almost shy smile. "Hi," she said softly, stepping inside without hesitation. "I hope I'm not disturbing anything." "Not at all," I replied, setting down the wrench in my hand. My chest tightened unexpectedly as I noticed the faint tremor in her voice, a vulnerability beneath her confident exterior that made her even more captivating. She held out a small envelope. "I found this in one of the drawers," she said, handing me a receipt from the last delivery. Normally trivial, but in her hands it felt significant. I accepted it with a nod, feeling the quiet weight of the moment. We moved to the small break area in the corner of the workshop, a space bathed in warm afternoon light filtering through the windows. She perched on the edge of a stool, her posture relaxed yet elegant, while I leaned against the counter, trying to mask the nervous energy that buzzed through me. The hum of the fan above and the distant sound of traffic outside filled the silence, creating an intimacy I hadn't anticipated. "I didn't mean to stay away so long," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought it would be easier for both of us." I looked at her, seeing the hesitation behind her eyes. "Easier doesn't always mean better," I said quietly. Her gaze softened, and for a moment, the room seemed suspended in time. "Maybe, but I forget sometimes that people notice more than they should," she murmured. I nodded, understanding immediately. It was the subtle acknowledgement of our unspoken connection, the shared awareness that what we felt was delicate, yet undeniably real. The tension wasn't dramatic. It wasn't shouted or declared. It was quiet, simmering, a gentle acknowledgement of the bond forming between us. "You know, I missed our talks," I admitted, the words spilling out before I could stop myself. "Me too," she whispered, and her hand brushed mine as she adjusted her sleeve. The contact was fleeting, accidental, yet it sent a warmth up my arm that lingered long after. The rain slowed outside, and for a fleeting moment, I noticed the golden light catching the edges of her hair, the curve of her smile, and the quiet steadiness of her presence. When she left, I didn't follow. I stayed in the workshop, letting the memory of her warmth settle in my chest. Because sometimes, a person doesn't need to stay in your life to change it. Sometimes, their presence, brief, quiet, and unassuming, leaves a mark deeper than time itself. It was early morning when the call came through, a final delivery to Vanessa's apartment. The air was crisp, sunlight spilling over the streets with a gentle glow, casting long shadows of parked cars and swaying trees. I loaded the truck slowly, my hands busy but my mind unsettled. Something about this delivery felt different. It wasn't just furniture anymore. It felt like the closing of a chapter one wasn't ready to let go of. When I arrived, the apartment looked almost empty. Curtains were drawn, some furniture already gone, boxes stacked neatly along the walls. The living space that had once felt warm and inviting now felt like a quiet echo of its former self. Vanessa stood in the doorway, her posture calm but a hint of wistfulness in her expression. She wore a soft cream blouse and beige slacks, the light catching her long black hair and the subtle freckles across her cheeks. Her lightly tanned skin glowed in the morning sun, and the faint lines around her eyes deepened as she offered a gentle, tentative smile. "Morning," I said quietly, stepping inside. "Ready for the big move?" She nodded, a small sigh escaping her lips. "Yes, it's time." Her voice was calm, but I caught a tremor of emotion beneath it. We began loading the furniture together, the sofa, the coffee table, and smaller items that had once filled her home with warmth. Every piece carried a memory. The morning light spilling over the sofa where we had shared casual conversation, the coffee table that had witnessed our laughter, the small lamp I had set up carefully weeks ago. Handling each item, I felt the weight not just physically but emotionally. "Thank you for all your help," she said softly, adjusting a box. Her hand brushed mine, lingering slightly longer than necessary. I caught her eyes, dark brown and steady, and felt a quiet ache. The kind that comes from realizing something meaningful is about to end. We paused for a brief moment, leaning against the stack of boxes. She looked around the empty apartment, her gaze sweeping over spaces that had held so many small moments. "It's strange," she murmured. "This place, it feels empty now, yet full of memories." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Some things are like that," I said softly. "They stay with you even when they're gone." When the last piece was loaded into the truck, we stood at the doorway, the morning sun highlighting her graceful figure. She stepped closer, the warmth of her presence pressing gently against me without touch. "I'll miss this," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I'll miss you." I wanted to say more, to tell her that she had left a mark on me, that her kindness, her laughter, and her quiet confidence had changed something inside me forever. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I simply nodded, offering a small smile that I hoped conveyed everything I couldn't speak aloud. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching one last glimpse of her framed in the doorway, long black hair glinting in the sunlight. She didn't wave, but I could feel the unspoken farewell in her eyes. Some people come into your life not to stay, but to leave you with a quiet understanding, a gentle warmth that lingers long after they're gone. That morning, as the city streets blurred past me, I realized Vanessa had done exactly that, leaving a piece of herself behind in the spaces she had touched, and in my heart. The city hummed around me, the familiar sounds of morning traffic and distant chatter a comforting backdrop. Yet I felt a strange quiet inside. It had been weeks since the final delivery at Vanessa's apartment, and life had returned to its usual rhythm: early mornings, long drives, and the steady hum of the truck engine. Yet, despite the routine, a part of me still lingered on that bright doorway, on her long black hair catching the sunlight, and on the warmth in her dark brown eyes that had quietly rooted itself in my memory. I often caught myself thinking back to that last morning, the way she had stood framed by the doorway, the faint tremor in her voice as she whispered that she would miss me. Not a word of goodbye, not a dramatic declaration, just a simple, quiet truth that carried more weight than anything else in my life had in weeks. It was subtle, but it had left a lasting impression. A reminder that connection doesn't always need spectacle to matter. In the following days, I found myself noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. The golden slant of sunlight through my apartment window in the early hours. The distant laughter of children playing outside. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the kitchen in the morning. Even the hum of traffic felt different somehow, almost comforting. Each small moment seemed richer, more meaningful, and I realized it was because of the time I had spent with her. Brief as it was, it had changed the way I experienced the world. One afternoon, as I was organizing my truck for another day of deliveries, I found a small envelope tucked between some old receipts. It was the delivery receipt from Vanessa's final furniture drop, but folded inside it was a short note in her familiar handwriting. "Thank you for the care you brought." It didn't go unnoticed. I held it in my hand, feeling the quiet power of her words. Peace. That was the word that came to mind. Not passion, not longing, but peace. She had entered my life for a short while and had left something permanent behind. A sense of calm, a reminder that kindness and presence matter more than grandeur or permanence. Even now, as I drove through familiar streets, I would sometimes glance at doorways or porches, half expecting to see her there. And while she was no longer physically present, the impact of her presence lingered. I realized that some connections are meant to be fleeting, yet they shape us in ways that endure far beyond the moment. Vanessa had been more than just a woman I had met on a delivery route. She had been a mirror, reflecting a part of me I had overlooked. The part that noticed the small things, that appreciated the subtle, that cherished quiet moments of genuine connection. And for that, I was grateful. Life went on, deliveries continued, and faces changed, but the lessons I had learned from her, about presence, patience, and the beauty of fleeting connections, stayed with me. Sometimes, love doesn't need to last forever. Sometimes, it only needs to leave a mark deep enough to change the way you see everything else. And as the sun set, spilling golden light across the streets, I felt a gentle gratitude for that brief chapter, for the warmth, for the quiet understanding she had brought. A reminder that even short encounters can echo in your heart indefinitely. Some connections don't last forever, but they leave a mark on your heart that time can't erase. Vanessa's presence, though brief, reminded me how small moments can hold the greatest meaning.